The Middle East region is one of the most water-stressed countries in the world, and rising water demand is putting pressure on freshwater supplies, all in the context of complicated geopolitical issues and a rapidly changing climate. So factors such as overfishing, coastal development, and pollution are also affecting the ecological health of the Gulf's waters. Furthermore, countries in the region face other acute water security issues that could be connected to conflict and are detrimental to regional stability. All of these factors highlight the need for new organizations and approaches to facilitate cooperation around shared water challenges. So in the next several minutes, we'll explore water security, how it is situated in the geopolitical stability of the Gulf region, and discuss policy pathways toward achieving solutions to the shared regional water challenges. So let me briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. All the way to my left is Ms. Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow in the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. She has over 15 years of experience as an analyst, researcher, and practitioner in complex humanitarian emergencies in conflict-affected areas in the Middle East. Next is Mr. Cuinn. He is the director at MDRC. MDRC is an international organization established as part of the Middle East peace process in 1996. It's mandated to find solutions to freshwater scarcity, conducting research, training, development cooperation, and transboundary water projects. Next, Dr. Hamad Ebrahim Al-Abdulla. He's executive director of the Bahrain Center for Strategic and International and Energy Studies. He directs a program of rigorous research to inform discussions, encourage thinking, and influence policymaking in the region. Finally, His Excellency Abdul-Rahman Al-Eryani, currently Water and Environment Advisor in the Presidential Office of Earthna. Earthna is a nonprofit policy research and advocacy center established by the Qatar Foundation to provide a holistic view of environmental, social, and economic prosperity. He's also former Minister of Water and Environment in the Republic of Yemen from 2006 to 2011, one of the most water-stressed countries in the world. Welcome, Your Excellency. So I'd like to start with what we'd call an icebreaker question, and I just wanted to go around starting all the way on the left with Ms. Hall. From your national or your institutional perspective, could you speak in general terms about water stress and regional geopolitical tension? How are they connected, if at all?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marcus, and thanks for the invitation. It's always great to speak right after Malcolm Gladwell, but I'm gonna try my best. And I thought I would start with an example that's very close to where we are today. Just around the corner from where we are in the Gulf of Oman is the largest marine dead zone in the world. Now, this is an area that is deprived of oxygen to the point where it can't really support life. And this marine dead zone is 10 times larger than the next largest one. It's about the size of Tunisia, actually larger. And scientists knew that it was bad, but they couldn't tell how bad it was until just a few years ago. And that's because piracy and insecurity at the surface prevented scientists from actually evaluating it. They eventually had to use robots to do so. And I think that this is really indicative of a problem that we see throughout the Middle East, which is that conflict tends to deprive us of looking at some of the other more structural issues at play, like water stress, and the interplay between tensions and water stress as well. At the same time, because of governance throughout the region, communities, societies are often deprived of the oxygen, the innovation, the social risk-taking, as Malcolm Gladwell was mentioning, that allow us to deal with this problem. And so if I can answer this question in kind of a cyclical way, because I think the connections are multifaceted. The first is this is a real problem because unlike what Jake Sullivan has said, conflict is a big problem in this region, as we know. About a third of the countries are embroiled in conflict, and others are affected by those conflicts, or they're directly implicated in them. All of these conflicts are protracted and internationalized, meaning that the drivers of those conflicts, the mistrust created, becomes entrenched over time, and it makes it very difficult to bring those conflicts to any kind of resolution. And that really kills the lifeblood of transboundary water sharing agreements, which is trust and transparency. Now, at the same time, we know that increasingly so, water infrastructure, water in general, is weaponized and targeted. This happens directly, as we've seen in Gaza, where water is simply cut off from the civilian population, or desalination plants are targeted. And we've seen this in the Syrian conflict as well. But there's also something that's a bit more insidious that we also need to be paying attention to. And to me, I call this the sort of weaponization of development in conflict-affected areas. We saw this pretty starkly in Libya, in eastern Libya, in Derna, when 2 dams broke, in spite of the fact that money had been allocated for their rehabilitation and ended up probably lining the pockets of politicians. But we've also seen it in Israel over the years, where water infrastructure has been demolished, confiscated, dozens and dozens of water cisterns, water tanks, et cetera. And so this is also a significant problem. You also see just the breakdown in governance during protracted conflict. So, raw sewage is basically just flooding into the Euphrates River. It's flooding into Gaza, and I think Ciaran can speak to this more eloquently than I. And this really creates inequities that maybe weren't there to begin with. So farmers, for example, that can drill deeper, that have political connections, begin to rise to the forefront. Other poorer farmers become displaced. And in terms of geopolitical tensions, it also creates problems because countries that are affected by conflict are normally not great advocates for themselves. I don't think it's a huge coincidence that Turkey and Ethiopia accelerated their dam projects at a time when their downstream neighbors were affected by conflict or falling apart. And then finally, and this is where we're starting to see the tipping point or the breaking point in the region, we're actually seeing the direct effects of water and violence and political tensions. And we see this at the communal level, where there's tribal conflict in southern Iraq, as you know very well, Marcus, over water scarcity. Just last year, the Iraqi government had to cut off 50% of water for irrigation in southern Iraq. And this has caused massive displacement. About 13% of the population in southern and central Iraq are displaced due to water scarcity and environmental degradation, climate change related issues. And then this in turn, as we know in Yemen and Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, this displacement then causes its own tension as people move into cities and put more pressure on cities as well. And when governments need somebody to blame, they may often blame their upstream neighbor or regional neighbors. And then this also adds to the geopolitical tension. So I think that there's many, many different ways that these issues kind of interact.
Thank you for that excellent framing. Mr. Cuinn?
Well, I agree with everything Natasha said. It's an extremely complicated area, water wars, environmental wars, big academic debates. It's a great academic area, and it's great to see an area like this where practitioners and academics are meeting. The issue of water and environmental wars as an academic area is mired in issues of causality. If you look close enough at any conflict, you'll find water. I mean, if you look, the issue in Palestine at the moment, what's the core issue? The core issue is lack of self-determination for the Christians and Muslims of the Holy Land. That's the actual cause. But if you want to find water, yes, there are water reasons. Is water being used as a tool of war? Yes. But is environment the real reason of the war? No. Okay? So it depends on what lens. And one of the real problems with this area is it is tend to be dominated by hydrologists and engineers and water specialists who find their area. You know, a researcher is like a solution looking for a problem. They tend to find their solution in any problem. So it's a very big issue. Here on this side of the Gulf, is water really a problem? When you turn on the tap, does water come out? Yes. Water here is a function of energy, 100%. We don't really use groundwater anymore. It's a function, absolutely 100% of energy. There's a mega plant in Dubai. I just saw the net present value, so the price of the desalinated water today is 35 cents per cubic meter for solar-powered photovoltaics linked to a battery, linked to a reverse osmosis system. And that battery is going to get cheaper in the couple of years' time. So water isn't actually a problem here. You can have a debate about brine and all of that, but water actually isn't a problem. Other parts of the world are going to get into desalination over the next couple of years. That now is an off-the-shelf technology. There's no argument to say country A has desalination, country B doesn't, therefore, you know, they have some power over country B. Transnational corporations are what have desalination plants. It's very, very basic science. It's very, very straightforward. So, if you're looking for environmental wars, you won't really find them. 40% of all wars in the last 60 years have had some transboundary environmental effort part, but never the core part. Historians can't really point to an environmental or a water war. But the key thing you can do with environment is what we do in MEDREC. One of our diplomatic mandates is to be a model organisation for states that want to use transboundary environmental in support of a peace process. So we have these issues like water, climate change, desertification, sea level rise that are joint concern between states, and we can use those issues to create multilateral frameworks, new multilateral approaches and normative systems to improve international relations between the countries in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. And thank you very much also to Georgetown University in the state of Qatar for the invitation and for their warm hospitality. I would like to answer the question in two phases. First of all, I wrote some general notes that we could discuss while we're answering the questions being proposed in the panel. But coming from the modern contemporary history field, I remember one of the sayings of a very famous Prussian military strategist and one of the founding fathers of strategy, overall strategic thinking in the 19th century, Karl von Clausewitz. And in his book called On War, he coined a term or a phrase called coup d'oeil, which literally means a stroke of the eye. So for example, if you're scanning through the room and you notice something, or you noticed an event, or something that would take you to the ultimate strategy. And I believe coming down to the coup d'oeil of what we have, which is climate change and overall water security, I think this is the perfect topic that could bring together the region. So it has become evidently clear that water stress and regional geopolitical tensions are closely interconnected, as the region is characterized by arid and also semi-arid climates. Limited freshwater resources and high population growth rates has become highly vulnerable to the water scarcity. Because when we're talking about freshwater, it's not just the scarcity of freshwater. In the opposite direction, we'll also have the ultimate growth of population. And the population in the region, and especially in the Arabian Gulf, is increasing. So the scarcity of freshwater in the region can also increase competition among countries and communities for access to fresh water, which can consistently also would result in the creation of tension within the region. Let alone also one of the important factors that will also contribute and is contributing to this event and the scarcity of water is climate change, which impacts such as rising temperatures, changing in precipitation patterns, and environmental degradation further exacerbated these challenges as countries. Moreover, water scarcity can have severe also socioeconomic consequences, including increased poverty and possibly also unemployment. So as water stress intensifies, the pressure on governments to address water-related issues grows, which may contribute to problems that we had mentioned earlier, including unemployment in the long-term future. This is why it's crucial to address water stress and resource management in a cooperative and sustainable manner like we are doing here today. So this requires international cooperation, affecting also effective water governance and the implication and implementation of innovative solutions, such as water conservation measures, efficient irrigation techniques. And again, I go back to the term of Karl von Clausewitz, in which he mentioned coup d'oeil, which is, this is the idea that we could build upon. This is the idea that would eventually bring the entire region together, in which we would all be part of. So instead of having conflicts within each other about water resources, we can work together to improve water resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for highlighting some of the themes that we will see later through all of the various breakout groups and panels. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Your Excellency.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, my answer will be informed by my experience in Yemen in the last 25 years working in environment and water. As you know, Yemen is one of the most stressed countries in the world regarding water. But until the early 70s, we were living in a more or less sustainable manner regarding water resources and water use. What happened is that this sustainability was built on traditional cooperation and traditional recognition of regulation, urf, what you call urf, traditional laws and regulations, and some sort of equity. And the cooperation was not some sort of option that people follow. It was a necessity, because the whole system of water management in Yemen, which is a very old and very complicated system, cannot be managed by small groups or individuals. What happened in the 70s is that Yemen opened up to the world. It was closed, it opened up. New technology came in, new approaches came in, some sort of revolution within the country against tradition. This complicated the whole issue. Water pump, diesel water pump, and borehole wells came in, made farmers more individualistic, because they feel that they can do this. They can produce their crops without need for their neighbors as in the past. Also, the wealth and monopolization of the resource became more and more, because the wealthy and the powerful control the resource. So the principle of cooperation and principle of respecting the laws and following the laws, this deteriorated. And this created the whole system of collapsing not only the resource, but also the social fabric. And it's complicated by mismanagement, corruption, and which is unique to Yemen, a crop that is really killing the whole country, which is khat, that it's using now close to 50% of the resource, which is a crop that is only used internally, doesn't have any value added to the country, and it's badly affecting the society, the health of the people, and creating artificial ways of keeping people living in the rural area to produce khat. Otherwise, they would have been moved to the coastal areas, maybe engaged in industries or services, but they are still living in the mountains as tribes, because khat sustain their living there. It's a drug, and it brings a lot of money. So with this, I feel that Yemen could be a microcosm for more regional issues, that the lack of cooperation, very vague regulation and laws governing the issue of water resources, and lack of efficiencies in many areas, or not caring about the efficiencies, and also in my thinking that people, government and politicians tend to go toward more visible and bigger projects to solve the security issue of the water, regarding the looking at many solutions. I mean, building big reservoirs or having big desalination plants is a solution, probably more efficient at the short term. But for sustaining the society during crisis, during conflict, I think that the approach should be more decentralized, more flexible and resilience that can withstand attack or targeting. This is my thinking about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that individual example. I'd like to shift the conversation to the concept of environmental peace building. So looking at examples such as the Jordan River Valley, there have been historical attempts to reduce conflict by promoting cooperation around shared waters. So likewise, could increasing cooperation around solving water challenges in countries both in the GCC and adjacent to the GCC, such as Yemen and Iran and Iraq, could this contribute to regional stability? And I'll direct this first again also to Ms. Hall.
Sure. I mean, just taking a step back, I think we need to define cooperation or what we want from cooperation over water. Because I think too often, especially in the past 20 years, I think there's been a lot of scholarship around the fact that cooperation is more the story of water than conflict. Unfortunately, these scholars, they point to the hundreds of treaties and agreements that have been signed over water over the past, hundreds of years. The problem is about 2/3 of those agreements were signed by North American and European countries. Only about 31 are in Asia. That includes the Middle East, and often those agreements are falling apart as well. And they're often falling apart because they were inequitable, unsustainable, non-transparent, non-binding to begin with. So when we think about cooperation, we need to think about it in the sense of whether or not it's sustainable and whether or not it's equitable. Because if it's neither of those things, it's highly conflict-laden and deeply problematic. So I think sort of the support of cooperation by any means is something that we need to question a little bit. And I think the Jordan River Valley is a very good example of this. Post-Oslo Accords in 1994, there were as many water agreements. Oftentimes, it basically gave Israel unilateral management over upstream waters, over water infrastructure in much of the West Bank. And so this has become deeply problematic over time. And a lot of these arrangements, and again, Ciaran can speak much more eloquently to this, have somewhat fallen apart. And this is in spite of the fact that the United States provided a lot of financial and security and diplomatic incentives to keep these negotiations going. But it's not just about Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. Also in Syria, I was just at the Wahdeh Dam, which is on the border between Jordan and Syria just a few weeks ago. It's empty. Syria has never allocated its promised amount of water to Jordan. And we're seeing this issue between Syria and Turkey further north now. So I think we need to think about those issues, and I don't want to sort of paint the problem. So I think that there's a few takeaways that we can get from these failures or these difficulties. And one of them is that there needs to be some kind of power broker to maintain a level playing field. Because the reality is there isn't a level playing field when it comes to transboundary water resources for many, many reasons. And as I said, the United States, has tried to play this role to varying degrees of success. in the Middle East. But I think we really need to think about that when we think about Yemen, for example, even within borders. If peace talks continue at some point, who is going to be the power broker to level the playing field again, even within communities, and ensure that endemic corruption and mismanagement doesn't cause conflict in the future in Yemen as well. The other thing is the need to look at these areas as a sort of a water basin management approach. So rather than sort of cutting up the Jordan River along arbitrary borders and just dealing with pollution in the downstream Jordan River basin, to look at these ecosystems more holistically. And there's a lot of good examples from Africa actually in terms of river basin organizations, but they're often underfunded. I think we also need to look at sort of non-water incentives, so more regional integration between countries. And we see this a little bit more cooperation between Iraq and Turkey, mainly because of political and trade relations between the two countries rather than anything else. I think I would leave it at that, but I would say that there probably is a need for some kind of international impartial body to do data collection on water sharing. Oftentimes, states use water data or look at water data as kind of state secrets, or they don't trust the other side's water data. So I think in this way, the international community could come together and sort of fill that gap.
So in terms of appropriate organizations, that leads me right to my next question, and I'll direct this to Mr. Cuinn. This is, are there adequate institutional mechanisms for this sort of regional cooperation around water security, desalinization, and maybe even maritime ecological protection? And if so, could they be improved?
Well, there aren't in the region at the moment. There are models. We're trying to build one at the moment. Most of this environmental peace building or environmental, they fail. They failed for 7 in designing our organization. We had an old organization from the 90s peace process, which we sort of consciously, in about 2010, destroyed and rebuilt again. And what we did is we did an analysis, first of all of these efforts and why they failed. There's 7 real efforts. The first one is what they call the rational reality gap. What seems very, very rational in Washington, D.C. or in the European headquarters or in a donor office sometimes doesn't actually work on the ground. So this rational reality gap. So the way you kill a rational reality gap is you have local ownership. Okay, so it has to be owned locally. Okay, a proper regional organization run by regional people. Second problem is one from organization psychology, the solution looking for a problem. Peace processes, conflict resolution are full of generally middle-aged men who look like me, who are quite messianic, going around the world who are a solution looking for a problem, okay? So your answer to that is that you have to have a systems rather than a mediator approach, okay? The world is full of mediators, but actually you don't have systems. You need systems based on the quality of countries to solve a particular problem. Third one is that, touching on what Natasha said, is transboundary cooperation in environmental issues does not necessarily equal peace. Okay? You can, in a war, have a little island of cooperation, the picnic talks between Jordan and Israel, for example, but no real impact on the war whatsoever. In South Africa in the 80s and 70s, the South African government and the Bantustans did transboundary cooperation. It had zero link to peace whatsoever. The Rhine, the Ruhr, the Danube, lots and lots of cooperation down the years. It didn't stop the First World War, the Second World War. It's the third thing. Fourth thing is that the governments and diplomats are the operating systems in this world, okay? So back to what Natasha said, if you have these, you need to have either a diplomatic power broker or it's what we have as a series of supporting states that have a normative impact, that create diplomatic norms around the things, that don't let the balance become one way or the other. The fifth and the most important one is that ignoring politics is political. Where you have an occupation, where you have an unfair power differentiation, if you say, let's ignore the war and let's go and clean the beach together, that's actually not very helpful, and that's actually an acceptance of the status quo and the inequality. So ignoring politics is political, you can't do that. The second last is that the academy is not society. If you give me money for per diems, I can get engineers and academics from any two countries in the world at war together. It's really easy. But it doesn't actually, you need to get the human being who holds the file, the civil servant. And that's why coming back, these organizations need a triple helix of diplomats, conflict resolution people, and scientists and engineers. You need that mix of people, just like in innovation. And the last thing is there is a very serious agency lacuna in this area. It's nobody's job to do it. So these are the gaps, but there is space. And the space, going back to Yemen, in the water, the approaches to water in Yemen, Oman and Iran, the Al-Falaj system, the system of a locally owned system imbalance. So diplomacy in this region is considerably more sophisticated than in Europe. At best, we have an arme détente, which is quite a negative thing of balance. In these water systems and in society, there's a proactive idea of a system in balance, and the system is what we look after. So we create balance between the parties, and if an external, if there's no water or there's a drought, we find balance again in a different way. But the focus is on equality between the parties and balance. And if you build a system around those things regionally, I think it can do very well and succeed.
So in terms of institutions, Dr. Abdullah, I wanted to ask you whether foreign ministries and defense ministries and other security organizations in the Gulf are incorporating water into their strategies and planning.
Well, first of all, yes. In terms of defense organizations and ministries, they are, because part of their work is to protect water resources. And not only that, but also to look into future of water technology and water resources. So it is evidently clear that the water security is a national priority to each and every GCC state member. Defense ministries and also defense organizations play a key role in addressing these challenges by incorporating water security into their strategies, planning, and also operations. They conduct comprehensive assessments of water resources, including availability, quality, and vulnerability to identify potential risks and also challenges in the sector. Infrastructure protection, as I had mentioned. So defense organizations are also involved in protecting critical water infrastructure, such as desalination plants, water treatment facilities, and also reservoirs. They recognize the vulnerability of these assets and to the potential threats, and including physical attacks, whether also cyber threats and also acts of sabotage. Defense ministries and security organizations in the Arabian Gulf region engage in international cooperation on water security issues. They participate regularly in regional forums, joint exercises, and also knowledge-sharing initiatives to exchange best practices, lessons learned, and also technology transfer. In addition, these organizations are responsible for introducing and implementing crisis management, which is part of their courses that they teach in these various ministries and also the various institutions within the ministry itself, which involve investing in water infrastructure and technologies that enhance water security, such as early warning systems and robust monitoring mechanisms. Also, we at the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies, Dirasat, we continuously provide various workshops, lectures, and seminars on water-related issues and also climate change. And we have noticed that defense organizations and also organizations related to the defense industry have been keen on participating and being involved in attending these organizations. And these seminars and workshops. So yes, we do believe that they play a key role, and it's part of their investment into the future. Thank you.
Thanks. So a key orientation of the conference is to think about the impacts of climate change on water security, and also to perhaps think about how this water and water scarcity could be elevated further onto the agenda at COP28. And so, Mr. Al-Eryani, thinking about Yemen itself, Yemen is one of the countries most impacted by climate change, and in some ways least resilient. So how might this be addressed in the context of Yemen, and are there any ways that it could be elevated onto the agendas of international organizations?
Well, I think the immediate problem of Yemen is finding peace. Without peace and building a strong central government, anything cannot be really implemented. It will be very difficult to implement anything. For sure that investment in resilience and adaptation is very important in Yemen. Yemen is suffering from scarce water resources, but also with climate change, the issue will be even more severe. We have very high population growth, and we have a problem with population distribution. We have a very high concentration of population in a mountainous, doesn't have any resources. Water resources is difficult. Very few, only maybe 30% or less than 30% of the population are in the coastal areas. 2,000 kilometers of coastal area is almost empty. And this is where the future, in my opinion, the future of Yemen has to be to encourage population to move to the coastal area and the plains to engage in other activities than growing cotton and subsistent farming. The water resource in Yemen is not going to be enough, even if we have very efficient systems to manage it, because the actual geography and geology of Yemen does not allow enough water for everybody with the population growth that we have. So desalination is very important future option in Yemen, but it cannot be done if the population is still in the mountain, because the cost of transportation is going to be prohibitive. So these new ideas has to be thought of and implemented. The problem is that now we have this peace talk that we are sort of engaged on, but the issue of climate change, water scarcity, is not in the agenda of the peace talk. Yeah, the regions are discussing sharing wealth, like oil wealth or minerals or other, but nobody is talking about land, agriculture, water, and the effect of climate change on the coastal area, and what will be the future of this. And this is a big problem. And I think that the international community that's supervising, and the regional community that's supervising the peace talk, has to influence this to have a little prospect of, better prospect of sustaining the peace in the future.
So you mentioned desalination as one example of something that needs to be implemented maybe to a greater extent in Yemen. And so I was wondering, thinking about the Arab Gulf countries, which have obtained 55 to 100% of their water supply from desalination, while other regional countries are facing growing demand for water, and in some cases lack access to funding sources to develop similar infrastructure to that in the Gulf. Do opportunities exist for what I'd label desalination diplomacy for Gulf Arab states toward more water-impoverished regions? And I could direct that to whomever would like to answer, but maybe Mr. Cuinn.
Sure. The issue, though, is that desalination technology it's not a tech transfer issue anymore. It's fairly off-the-shelf technology. It's like saying, cars. I mean, you just buy desalination, you tender an international person. So there's a humanitarian element there, of course. UNICEF, for example, built one of the plants in Gaza. USAID built another one. So there's no problem with that. It's very, very easy. I would say if you're going to use desalination as a diplomatic, way to bring people together, first of all, I think the diplomatic systems in this region are very sophisticated, and as sophisticated as anywhere on Earth. So there's no dearth there of that. But I think a broader environmental one, taking in desalination, and as desalination is a function of energy, desalination, solar, and don't forget with sea desalination, it's different in Yemen, but I mean, the ocean is 35,000 parts per million salt, and brackish water is 1,000 to 10,000. Fresh water up to 250 parts per million is drinkable. From above, it's not. It's much cheaper to desalinate wastewater and brackish water. Sea level desalination should be the last thing you do. So just jumping in and saying sea level desalination is the, in Yemen it probably is,
Yes.
but in a lot of countries it just really isn't. I mean, parts of South Pakistan are now looking to get into very large sea level desalination. But anyway, to use it as a diplomatic thing, there's 2 points. First of all, this part of the world has highly developed and very, very good diplomatic systems. It doesn't need that, but it probably does need all parts of the Gulf, an environmental type diplomatic organization that coordinates, share scientific information, share best practices, and when there are problems, I mean, the fact that you could use that organization to enforce diplomatic norms and have a normative impact would be very, very, very powerful and very useful.
Thanks. Are there any other thoughts on this idea of desalination diplomacy?
I mean, I would just add a couple of points just off of what Ciaran was saying. I mean, oftentimes I get worried that desalination has the potential to sweep more critical water management failures under the rug, or diplomatic or political failures under the rug. I see this in Jordan, where we're pushing for desalination, which probably will be a necessary solution for Jordan. But there's a lot that can be done in terms of non-revenue water, in terms of leakage and theft, that still hasn't been addressed. In terms of the political failures, I think there has been diplomacy. I mean, the Gulf countries have funded desalination plants in places like Gaza. And the issue is that if those desalination plants aren't running because of lack of fuel during conflict, or they're targeted during conflict, it exposes the limits to this kind of technology. So if you can use those kinds of investments, but tie them to diplomatic solutions or political solutions in the West Bank, for example, then that might be a more sustainable way forward. The other thing that's more sort of localized to here is that the Arabian Gulf is very shallow. The mean depth is something like 35 meters. So right now, a lot of Gulf countries desalinate, but if Iran and Iraq start desalinating as well, that's 150 million people, which is likely to double within decades. So I think sort of preemptive diplomacy around desalination to sort of avoid the environmental effects of the chemical and brine discharge would also be much needed. And I know the Gulf countries are working on a lot of R&D to move those solutions forward.
Thank you. I think we could turn to a few questions from the audience. So Ms. Hall, you mentioned that the world needs an international water data oversight body to effectively craft better water solutions. Could you expand on this? How could such a body be formed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are multiple bodies in place right now. There's the UN Water Convention and others, but I think the critical issue is that it's trusted by riparian states, and that can really only happen over time. But as long as that data is trusted by all sides or acknowledged by all sides, then I think that is a significant way forward. The biggest issue is getting the riparian countries to agree to it. Because, as I said, oftentimes these are issues of national security for countries like Iraq that don't really want to share such data. But I think we're getting to a breaking point whereby a lot of countries won't have much of a choice in the future. And so I think that this kind of body could also level the playing field. But I don't have a very specific answer to that question, because I think in this multipolar era, we're seeing a lot of multilateral institutions break down. So I think we need to be flexible and adaptable, because we are going to have to look outside of the Security Council and outside of the bodies that we've used for conflict resolution for a long time in order to come to sort of more sustainable cooperation.
Thanks. So don't forget that you can use your scan code to submit questions. But in the meantime, I would like to just go around and ask people, are there any final key messages or recommendations that you would offer as we think about preparing the conference proceedings and bringing the messages forward from the conference? Maybe I could start with Your Excellency.
Well, I mean, I don't have recommendation for the conference, but I think I have a suggestion that for a country like Qatar, for example, decentralized water production is very key to secure the water resources in the future. And even neighborhood or small generator of desalinized water or treated water from the brackish water that's also going up in Doha, for example, is, I think, a choice that can be looked at as a security guard against outside attack or sabotage or terrorism. And this is my thinking now about this.
Thanks. So Dr. Abdullah?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge and emphasize the urgent need to address water security challenges in the GCC, promoting also integrated water management practices to encourage collaboration and coordination among stakeholders, including governments, academia, industries, and also researchers. Furthermore, embracing innovation and technology and highlighting its role in addressing the issues of water security, and also the adaptation of water treatment and desalination and advanced technologies in that matter, in that field, smart water management systems, and also data-driven decision-making tools. Also, furthermore, enhancing water conservation and efficiency measures to optimize water use by encouraging the adaptation of sustainable agricultural practices, and highlighting the need to integrate climate change adaptation strategies into water security planning. And lastly, I would also like to emphasize the role of universities, think tanks, in bringing awareness to the subject matter, like we're doing here today, to the general public, which is something that is of vast importance, something that people need to and ought to learn and know about in terms of preserving water security for themselves and for the future generations. Thank you.
Thanks. So key recommendations on water security and stability?
I would say to stop just thinking of this as an engineering problem, that actually you need peace processes. You can't expect a family in Yemen to think of anything other than their day-to-day life and day-to-day survival, or climate change. So this is very, very central to peace processes, to international relations and everything. Unless we have peace and equity, we can't really focus on these things.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think this conference is going to be about climate financing quite a bit, loss and damage. But following from Ciaran's point, the number and the length of conflicts and crises around the world has doubled and tripled since 2005. So I think we need to be better at ending conflicts, which we've been very, very poor at. And we also need to be more responsible during conflicts. Climate financing is never going to be enough. There is going to need to be trillions invested. And so we need to look at development aid, at humanitarian aid, and really mainstreaming sustainability and resilience into all programming that's ongoing. What I have seen firsthand in places like Syria is that, we just think about wastewater treatment, when the conflict ends. What if the conflict doesn't end for years or decades? And we don't have, any solutions for that at the end of it. So I think there's going to be a lot of consternation about how little climate financing gets to these countries. And for good reason, because all the countries experiencing protracted humanitarian crisis are have very high climate vulnerability, and they receive very little climate finance. But we also have to acknowledge the political context of these countries. It is very complex to engage in water management in war economies. And so I think we also need to just do a better job of acknowledging those political realities.
Thank you. So I think we're at the end of our time for the hour, but I wanted to encourage people to, if we want to continue the conversation on regional stability, that there are panel discussions tomorrow during those breakouts. But please join me in thanking our panelists in this really interesting conversation.